In a quiet suburban town, Dr. Angela Moore, a successful and compassionate surgeon, had just returned home from a long shift at the hospital. She was tired, but her mind was sharp. Her 10-year-old son, Jamal, had come home from school complaining about how some of the kids were bullying him. They had made fun of his name, his clothes, and even his skin color. As a mother, Angela was heartbroken, but she knew this wouldn't be the first time Jamal would face such ignorance. Still, she could only protect him so much that afternoon. Jamal had a doctor's appointment at the local clinic. He had been feeling under the weather, and Angela decided to take him herself, thinking the doctor could give him something to help him feel better. They arrived at the clinic, and everything seemed normal at first. However, as they checked in, Angela noticed a shift in the atmosphere. A nurse at the front desk, a young woman named Rachel, barely looked at them as she handed over a clipboard for Angela to fill out. She could feel the nurse's coldness. But Angela was used to being underestimated. She wasn't surprised. The nurse's brief glance and dismissive tone were all too familiar. Still, she decided to keep her cool. They made their way to the waiting area, where Jamal sat quietly, his eyes cast downward. Angela, always aware of the subtle microaggressions, noticed the nurse muttering something to another staff member, something about people like them. A few minutes later, the nurse called them into an examination room. Angela led Jamal in, and they sat down. Jamal looked uneasy, and Angela placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The nurse took a few more details, but it was clear from her body language that she was uncomfortable. Her interactions with Jamal were curt and impersonal, and she kept her focus on the clipboard. Avoiding eye contact with Angela, Angela felt a pang of frustration. She knew this nurse's behavior was rooted in prejudice. It was subtle, but it was there, and she wasn't about to let it slide. She decided it was time to address it head-on. When the nurse turned to leave, Angela stood up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Can I have a word with you?" The nurse turned around, startled by the suddenness of Angela's voice. "Is something wrong?" the nurse asked, a slight edge to her tone. Angela didn't flinch. "Yes, actually. I couldn't help but notice the way you've been treating my son. You've been dismissive with him and a bit cold with me, and I'd like to know why." The nurse's face tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, but Angela didn't give her the chance. "Let me introduce myself properly," Angela continued. "I am Dr. Angela Moore, Chief of Surgery at City General Hospital. I'm sure you're familiar with my work, though you might not have realized who I was." The words hit like a thunderclap. The nurse froze, her face draining of color. The entire atmosphere in the room shifted in an instant. The casual arrogance in the nurse's demeanor vanished, replaced by an air of discomfort. I didn't know," the nurse stammered, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry, Dr. Moore. I didn't mean." Angela raised her hand to stop her. "It's not about what you meant," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of years of experience in dealing with ignorance. "It's about how you treat people. Jamal is a child. He deserves kindness and respect, just like anyone else. And I won't tolerate anyone treating him or me with anything less." Jamal, who had been staring at the floor, looked up at his mother. Angela could see the worry fade from his face. For the first time today, he smiled a small but knowing smile. The nurse stood there, her hands shaking slightly. She couldn't meet Angela's gaze, her eyes darting toward the floor, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. I'm really sorry. I'll make sure to be more careful," she said quietly. Angela nodded, her posture softening just a little. "I know you will," she said. "We all have to work together, no matter our differences. I expect to see that from you in the future. Now, let's make sure my son gets the care he needs, and let's move on from this." The nurse nodded quickly, then left the room, her steps hurried and uncertain. As the door closed behind her, Angela turned to Jamal, who was now looking at her with admiration. He stood up and gave her a tight hug. "We're amazing, Mom," Jamal whispered, his voice full of pride. Angela smiled, hugging him back. "You're amazing too, baby. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small because of who you are. You carry your pride with you just like I do." Minutes later, the doctor arrived to examine Jamal, and the rest of the appointment went smoothly. The nurse returned, and this time her demeanor was entirely different. She was polite, respectful, and professional, her earlier discomfort replaced by a new understanding. When they left the clinic that day, Angela couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet triumph. It wasn't just about standing up for herself and her son, it was about breaking down the walls of prejudice one encounter at a time. And as they walked to their car, Angela knew this wouldn't be the last time she'd have to confront ignorance. But she would face it with strength and grace. As always, Jamal, walking beside her, was learning exactly what it meant to carry that same legacy of dignity.